This Week in Parasitism is brought to you by the American Society for Microbiology at microbeworld.org/TWiP. Time for TWiP This Week in Parasitism, episode 89, recorded on May 14th, 2015. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and with me is Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
How are you, Dickson?
Very well, thanks.
You flew in from Boston, huh?
I did.
Wow, the world traveler.
Well, that's not quite the world, but I was in Chicago just before that, so maybe I'm a U.S. world traveler.
About San Francisco, you could do the whole country.
Yeah.
I'm going to L.A. next week.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So I took the train up to Boston on the day of the fatal accident near Philadelphia.
Must have happened before the
Penn State. I've never seen it that empty because they canceled all the Washington shuttles.
But the northern trains were still running.
The northern trains were still running.
Also with us today, Daniel Griffin. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Where have you been? You've been here, right?
I was actually in Chicago. I just flew back from Chicago last night.
With Dickson?
No, I shot out there for a day, and we avoided each other. We
did.
I checked, and I waited till he left, and then I went.
That's right. There was only room for one of us. There's only room for one TWiPer at a time.
I like Chicago.
You might say we were date
I like Chicago.
TWiPers.
It's a nicely laid out city.
I like Chicago, too.
Chicago's good.
There's a lot of space.
Chicago's
It looks
good.
like it was planned, not like New York where they just threw things in.
So
well, the time of the year, it's when you go to Chicago. If you go there in...
winter is a little bit different.
Yes. I was there one time. It had been 3 weeks since the traffic lights had turned, or the street lights had turned off. It had just been that dark and gray. But now
that's not good.
It's sunny. There's sailboats there. You're looking out on the lake. It's a pretty city. I like it.
Vincent, maybe we should have as our theme song the Beatles song, Day Tripper, because we turn out to be Day TWiPers.
Day TWiPers, yeah. Unfortunately, as you know, the Beatles song is copyrighted and we just can't use it.
Well, maybe we can modify it somewhat.
Well, we
mutate it.
It's a good title, Day
Day
TWiPers.
Day TWiPers. No one ever called us that, but maybe they should start.
One-way ticket girl, right? Is that how it goes? Day TWiPer.
I'm a Day TWiPer. So if you had to be a Beatle, which one would you be?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. I would not be Ringo.
No.
George was a little bit too... I think he wrote the best songs, but I think he was a little too weird.
You're going to get mail.
John got shot.
True.
I don't want to be John, so I'd be Paul.
Paul lost a lot of money in his divorce.
I saw Paul. Yeah, that was a dumb thing to do. I saw him in concert out at Shea Stadium, City Field a couple of years ago. Man, it was so good.
Yeah.
What a musician. He's really good.
Yeah.
And I brought I brought everyone, and my oldest son, I don't want to go here because he likes this. And he actually liked it at the end. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I'd be Paul. What would you be?
I would take John Lennon. I think John Lennon had a wide range of interests and an eclectic view of life. Mm-hmm. And I mostly associate with him. When I listen to the Beatles, I hear him above all the others singing.
His wife has an exhibition at MoMA.
Yeah, she does. In fact, it's a retro of an exhibition she had in the 70s, which I understand is how they met.
How about you, Daniel? Were you a Beatles fan at all?
Yes, I'm old enough.
Okay.
It's a tough choice. You bring up how incredibly talented Paul McCartney is as a musician, and I think they all are. I think it's John Lennon who I look up to the most because of his focus on social action, trying to make a difference in the world.
Exactly right.
Not to say that the others weren't, but yeah, it was a great tragedy to lose him. I often think of what would he have been able to accomplish and do to our world if he hadn't.
Me too.
So highly unfortunate.
I was in Manhattan when that happened and heard it on the radio, and I was stunned.
I was in Boston.
Stunned.
I was doing my postdoc.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, let's do a TWiP here because we are the Day TWiPers.
Here we go.
And we have some answers to last week's case. The first one that came in was from Robin, who said cerebral cysticercosis. Then he put in parentheses, trichinosis, ? All right, but he also sent two pictures.
He did.
To illustrate a band shift.
Yep.
And the first one is a cell counter with 5 buttons. And he says, this is from the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
That's right.
Manual counters for the differential count had the buttons left to right for neutrophils, bands, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes. More of the 100-button presses on the left buttons constituted a left shift. So it's entirely because the counter had it on the left.
Not only that,
That's
notice
so funny.
how many buttons are there?
5.
And how many digits do you have on your hand?
5.
Exactly. So a good technician uses all 5 fingers, and they can go like crazy through a blood smear. It's just absolutely amazing
Then he
to watch.
sent one below, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
That's tougher,
And he said when this one is needed, the patient has a problem.
I'll say.
5-key differential counter. So this one also has, they have little pictures of the cells.
Oh, yeah.
They have NRBC, blast,
That's
pro,
right.
myelo,
That's right.
meta, baso, eos, band, monocytes, lymphocytes, segmented, and total.
Right.
Wow, that would be a lot of tapping there.
That's a bigger differential.
Did you used to use these, Dickson?
Yep.
To do bloods?
Yeah.
Really?
I took a course here called Clinical Pathology.
Ah, cool.
And they made us do that work. And so I actually loved doing it, though. It was fun. A lot of microscopy, a lot of... Sometimes you diagnosed a disease, and you didn't know what you were looking at first, but it was very interesting.
Christine from Australia, Brisbane, writes, the case sounds like neurocysticercosis caused by brain infiltration of larvae of the pork tapeworm Taenius solium and the immune system's response to it. Although she claims to not eat meat other than chicken for economic reasons, this does not exclude consumption at celebrations or on rare occasions in the more distant past. But wait. This diagnosis is supported by the lack of eosinophilia, and the neutrophilia without left shift is most likely due to demargination. As a side note, Dickson's explanation of left shift is right on the money as I was taught. Weather here in Brisbane is changeable after a devastating east coast low that brought flooding, intense rains on Friday, to a delightful sunny autumn day with 26 C temperatures. We have clouded over again on Sunday. Hey, it's going into the fall in Australia. We got summer here, spring.
True, you're absolutely right. So it's about even right now in both places. So I must.
It is.
Can I add a little note to her comments?
Sure.
And that is, that this is an infection. If she's correct, that doesn't require eating meat in order to catch.
Right. That's right. That's why I remember.
So
we will definitely talk.
Get to that.
We'll get to that.
Well, if that's the right
if
diagnosis.
This is, of course, the right diagnosis, of course, we're just speculating
Next
here.
one is from Jan, our friend in, I think, Rotterdam. Gentlemen,
Right.
is it cysticercosis? That would fit the complaints. It's common in that part of the world, and the fact that you can acquire the parasite from fecal contamination of foodstuffs without eating meat makes me lean that way. Greetings. P.S. The weather is 15C, occasional drizzle, and the cherries are blooming. And you know why he says that, of course. The cherries are blooming, Dickson.
I do know why
I think
he
you've
says
forgotten already.
No, I know why he says that.
He says that because over on TWiP I was
he's
saying
rubbing in
that
the fact
cherry
that,
blossoms don't do anything.
not only that, you don't even know what an angiosperm is. But you do now. But you do now. But this has a correction in it too. That if I might add that if he's correct and it's neurocysticercosis, it's no animals are responsible for spreading this the way he claims.
Okay. Read the next one from Wink.
Wink writes, with the information provided, you must expect neurocysticercosis. If it's a zebra, my wild and crazy guess would be an errant Echinococcus vogeli.
You don't know that one, Dickson?
I don't know vogeli. I don't know.
Remember,
vogeli.
Wink is an ID doc.
Got it. So that could
Thinking
be
zebras.
another form of neurocysticercosis caused by a juvenile tapeworm, but not caused by Taenius solium, but rather this other Echinococcus, which is a zoonotic infection, as I recall.
Take the next one, Dickson.
Also?
Yep.
Okay. Bjorn writes, I'm making a wild guess on this one. Wild in the sense that it's atypical, but not entirely impossible. I'm guessing that this was a case of latent malaria breaking out, possibly in the form of cerebral malaria. The reasoning is this. First, the patient is from Central America, where she lived for many years. She might well have picked up malaria there. The shaking chills she presents is a typical symptom that may well be caused by malaria. 2, the seizure she had is consistent with cerebral malaria, so this is consistent. 3, if the form of malaria she picked up was Plasmodium vivax or P. ovale or P. malariae, since these particular species have an ability to hibernate in the liver for many years or even decades in the form of clinically invisible hypnozoites, malariae can't, Ovale and Vivax can, so 2 out of 3 isn't bad. 4, she might not even have any malaria apparent infection previously, so this could be the first time she experienced malaria symptoms. It is also possible that she had malaria previously but had ignored it. The family only took her to the ER after she had multiple seizures, so a little bit of shaking chills might not have been enough to make medical attention seem necessary. To confirm or reject this diagnosis, use a quick diagnostic test for all the known malaria forms, and if any of them are positive, start medication immediately. Blood smear, thick and thin, would also be nice to confirm/reject malaria and also identify the species. The internet tells me that the weather is nice outside, but since I'm in a train in a tunnel on my way to work, I really couldn't tell.
I have to say this was my guess also.
You were thinking malaria.
I was thinking cerebral malaria.
I like the fact that, he's not actually outside, and much like us, we figure out what the weather's like from our electronic devices.
And looking out the window.
I'm lucky to have a window. Daniel,
No, I stayed at this hotel in Chicago. A really nice hotel, the Talbots. And when you check in, they take down your cell phone because they say, "Oh, if you need anything, just text us."
Really?
And I was
nice.
How do you do that?
Can I just call down? Can I talk to a person? My daughter thought it was great.
All right, let me ask you, Daniel. Soon you'll be able to walk into a hotel with your cell phone and just go to the room. It'll tell you what room, and you hit it, and it will open the door. Is that okay with you, or do you want to check in at the counter?
It's okay with me. I like interacting with human beings.
You are a doc. You better learn.
Some of them don't.
Some of them don't, really?
That's right. Surgeons, pathologists. They don't even see people. They see bits and pieces.
Surgeons see them asleep.
Exactly.
Although surgeons talk to them before and after.
Sometimes.
My son had surgery last year, and his surgeon was very nice.
Some do, but a lot of them don't.
I used to touch him when Devin, how are you?
That's good.
Put his hand on him.
Like that.
And afterwards, he would look at him.
No.
Can I take a picture of your scars? They're very nice. I did a good job.
I think
the cool thing is
they spell New Jersey backwards.
He took out his cell phone because I'm thinking back to when my father was a doc. He took out his cell phone and took a picture, right, and he's got it there. And boy, my father would have loved that.
Yeah.
It's so hard to take pictures back then because not only you needed a camera, you had to develop the film.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
and then if you did X-rays, you had these big sheets of film. Wow.
I have an iPhone 6. Which is an upgrade from the 5, obviously. So when you take a picture of something, I was stunned by this. I went to review my pictures, and it told me where I took them.
Of course.
It has a GPS.
Yes, it has a GPS, and it puts what's called metadata into
Vincent,
each
that's
photo.
Amazing.
What
that's
time?
Amazing.
Listen to this. Not only what time and where and the date and all, but the f-stop, the shutter speed.
That's incredible.
The other camera settings. Yeah,
that's
Very
remarkable.
cool.
No, I think this
is
number
great.
one.
Daniel, can you take Elise's email, please?
I can. Dear TWiP Trifecta, I hope this finds you all well and frolicking. And this, I'm going to have to pause. I have a visual of the three of us frolicking. No. Frolicking in this gorgeous moment of New York springtime. It'll only be here for a few moments before summer swamps in. So frolic while you can.
A few weeks ago it was really warm, and now it's back to real spring chilly
moderate
weather,
temperatures.
Right?
Yeah,
it's not warm anymore.
Typical.
Did you notice?
I did.
Chicago
and it was
absolutely
actually
cold, wasn't it?
Well, actually, last week it was very humid too. It was a combination of it got in the 80s. It was humid.
I turned the AC on in my house.
Vincent, when I was in Chicago last Sunday, it actually snowflaked. Along with the rain, snowflakes. So this woman, Elise wants us to TWiP the light fantastic.
Yeah,
is that what she wants?
That was actually the name of an episode.
Do
you
just
remember?
Harken back to that because I was the one that chose that too.
That's when That's when you and I got along back then.
Better. We seem to be resolving our differences. I think I feel a melting of the Iron Curtain.
It's okay. I'm just kidding.
We suffered that change of weather that Dickson is describing. I took my daughter there to Chicago for a medical problem she has to be seen at a clinic there, and she of course dressed based upon how she was feeling at the moment when we left New York. So it's this big suitcase. I don't know what was in there, but no clothes apparently, because we got to Chicago and she had a T-shirt and shorts and immediately said, I'm freezing. It was quite a bit colder in Chicago and windy, which I liked. Let me continue. I think I have a diagnosis for the patient featured in TWiP 88. I suspect strongly that the patient has neurocysticercosis caused by tapeworm larvae, Tenia solium. There are two types of neurocysticercosis, the parenchymal and the extraparenchymal, and I don't know if both can cause the seizures the patient has. So I can't be more specific diagnostically. I know the patient was emphatic about how she doesn't eat any meat, but it is much more likely to become infected with tapeworm larvae through fecal oral contamination than from eating undercooked meat, which would lead to intestinal tapeworms anyway. Whether or not it's neurocysticercosis, we'll make a point of discussing all this.
Indeed,
it's very interesting stuff. Fecal oral contamination also makes it possible for the larvae to make their way to the brain, eventually creating cysts that can lead to seizures of the sort that brought the patient to the emergency room. There are a lot of possibilities as to how the patient got infected. She came to the United States from El Salvador 10 years ago. Cysticercosis and neurocysticercosis are both quite common infections in developing countries, and the incubation period can be extremely long. In addition, she could have contracted the parasite from someone who visited who was infected. In general, most cases of cysticercosis and neurocysticercosis in the United States do occur in immigrants from Latin American countries. But they can also show up in people who travel to countries where tapeworm infections are common or patients who have contact with carriers. Cases in the United States are on the rise. The CDC was very clear about how widespread this sort of infection is and has put it on its list of neglected parasitic infections, which is a great name that need public health attention.
Right.
And I actually like that. It's neglected parasitic infections.
Yeah.
We often talk about neglected tropical infections, which often puts people in the developing world to sleep because they say, "Oh, not something we have to worry about." So
It's
I
also
like this.
medical curriculum neglected parasitic infections
Is that
because
right?
it's on it's very few medical schools actually teach any of this anymore. So it's not just neglected; it's omitted. So that's too bad, though.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
I was interested to read that neurocysticercosis is a leading cause of adult-onset epilepsy in developing countries.
True.
I didn't realize that the diagnosis of epilepsy could refer to this sort of seizure disorder. Yeah. What would be the best thing to do for this patient? Her seizures are not the sort that would necessarily regulate with epilepsy medications. Most of the sources I found noted that antiparasitic medications would cause more brain swelling and pressure. And also, unless I misunderstand, it seems as if the seizure activity resolves as the larvae are dying. So does it stop once the larvae are dead? Will this eventually resolve? As always, thank you so much for your work and for your wonderful podcasts. I truly look forward to them. Best.
All right. AJ writes, hello, parasailing parasitologist. Who parasails here?
I don't.
Do you parasail?
I have parasailed once.
I never did.
No.
Another interesting case. I'm shooting from the hip here, but sounds like neurocysticercosis. Not eating pork keeps her from acquiring the adults in her intestines like the worm wants. But if one of her meat-eating friends had adult worms, got eggs on their fingers, and then made everyone a salad, well, then she could very well have had dead or dying larvae in her brain. Then no one wins. Taenia solium is still very common in many South American countries. While it seems unusual that she could be experiencing symptoms from a 10-year-old exposure, the adults could easily live that long in a friend or family member's intestines, or maybe a friend visited San Salvador and picked up some worms more recently. Looking forward to hearing the answer. P.S. The weather in San Diego still dry.
Right.
Dickson, Grace.
I will. Grace writes, Dear TWiPers, this is another joint effort by me, Grace, and my science girlfriend, Kaylee. We think the culprit in the case of the seizuring woman from El Salvador is Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm. This lovely parasite, I like that, this lovely parasite may have taken up residence in the patient years ago through contaminated pork before she ever moved to the U.S. and found purchasing meat too costly. We write to you from mile marker 18 in Idaho, the closest place to our field residence that gets cell service. The small mammals of Idaho send their greetings. Best wishes, Grace and Kaylee.
That's very nice that
That's
you
touching.
went.
This lovely, I like this. This is a lovely parasite. It got some grace and style. No pun intended, but it's got some style to it.
Yes,
I like
well,
that.
viruses are lovely, too.
Only when you can see them.
Oh, of course.
Tapeworms you have no problem with whatsoever. They're macro parasites. Right?
Oh, yeah.
20-foot long jobs.
Are you saying your parasites are better than my viruses?
I didn't say they're better. I just said they're more visible, and therefore they attract more attention.
Daniel, Carol is next.
Carol writes, Greeting, TWiPers. I missed writing in last episode, but I was pleased to hear that what I had guessed was correct. This time, I'm managing to write before the next episode is up. My guess for the case study this episode is neurocysticercosis. Just because she reports not eating meat due to the expense, now doesn't mean she didn't eat it during the 23 years before she immigrated. I don't eat meat now, partly for ethical and partly for economic reasons. Finding meat that has been raised in a manner I can accept is possible, but it's out of my price range. But my entire extended family does, and I did while growing up. The weather here in Victoria is again sunny and mild, with a nice ocean breeze. Vincent will be happy to hear that there are no longer any cherry blossoms messing up the trees, though he might be disappointed that the lilacs are in full bloom. Looking forward to the next TWiPers podcast eagerly, as they provide a nice break from studying for summer courses without making me feel guilty for not learning things. Carol.
Actually, I like lilacs.
Oh,
I saw some the other day along the side of the road.
So you're a flower discriminator.
The lilacs grow up. They're viney, right?
They are.
Or maybe I'm thinking of wisteria.
They're
similar, purple.
They're similar.
Those aren't bad, and they smell good too.
They do.
The lilacs.
They do.
Right? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
They do.
It's funny how many people picked up on my cherry blossom negativity.
Oh, wow.
Donna writes, heard your recent podcast, and I'm writing RE the case study this week. First, though, feel obliged to update you on the weather in Oxford, UK today. Warmish, up to 18 C and cloudy, but no rain. In the case study cysticercosis caused by Taenia solium? If so, would you treat the family, especially the infant? Found this paper from 10 years ago suggesting cases were going up in the U.S.
Right.
And she sends a link to a paper called Neurocysticercosis.
Right.
You know, in my travels, I was just in Oxford last month.
You were. That's right.
That was fun. That is a place worth visiting.
I was there just before Christmas.
Oxford is the home of Inspector Morse.
Right.
And
do you know that?
And Lewis's partner, I don't know if anyone watches Inspector Lewis, but Lewis has a partner who studied at Cambridge, so they, of course, make these slight... When he doesn't know how to translate something and they have to go to the Oxford Scholar, they say, where did you study? Oh, Cambridge. What are they teaching up there these days?
Nothing important, obviously.
Where did you study, Dickson?
Where did I study?
I'm just kidding. The next
I'm
one
still
is
studying.
Is yours, Dickson. Varun.
Okay. Greetings, professors. In response to TWiP in number 88 case, there is a series of parasites to be considered when it comes to parasites related to seizures, and he gives a reference. From the given list of symptoms, it probably is pointing towards neurocysticercosis, though classically it is a meat-derived condition. There are sufficient conditions described by transmission through unwashed vegetables with fecal contamination. I'm also considering that it also can sometimes have an unusually long incubation period. I would like to know if there are any significant findings from brain imaging. What was the differential count in IG ELISA for cysticercosis and toxoplasma? My guess, NCC, neurocysticercosis caused by cystic larvae of Taenia solium.
All right. Daniel.
Anne writes, Dear TWiP team, my thoughts for the woman from El Salvador are that the case description best fits that of cerebral cysticercosis, neurocysticercosis. It is acquired through the ingestion of tapeworm eggs in the feces of an infected human carrying the intestinal tapeworm Taenia solium. This represents an aberrant form of the life cycle. Typically, the life cycle would be completed by a pig ingesting material contaminated with human feces containing the eggs, and humans would then, in turn, acquire the tapeworms through ingestion of undercooked pork containing the larval stage. It is an important cause of acquired epilepsy in areas where Taenia solium infection is common and sanitation is poor. Turns out it occurs in my home state, too. And she's got a reference here.
Yep.
Taenia solium tapeworm infection, Oregon. I am mildly disappointed with Dickson's dismissive comments this week. I'm glad I get to read this. About current veterinary education. Certainly the scope of knowledge required to become a board-certified veterinary pathologist is extensive. I will point out that we don't have the luxury of studying only one species. I adore the show and look forward to the podcasts as they come out. Thanks as always.
What did you say?
What did you say?
What did you do? I've got to
What
listen.
did I say?
What did
I
you
don't
say?
remember saying anything dismissive about veterinary pathology. I think veterinary pathologists have a hell of a time trying to come up with the right diagnoses because of the diversity of their patients.
She took a dig at you, you know.
I She did, but I mea culpa if I said it, but I certainly didn't mean it that way. I actually have deep respect for veterinary pathology.
I know he's always slighting the medical education with regard to
that
parasitic diseases.
part I can take aim at because I was part of that for 38 years. But I've known many wonderful veterinary pathologists, including Tracy McNamara, who was the chief veterinary pathologist for the Bronx Zoo.
Do you think that for medical students, parasitology education is not good?
In some cases, it's completely absent.
Here, is it still present?
It is.
Even though you retired?
No, we still have a full course called medical parasitology, but unfortunately, it's given in the first year. My course used to be given in the second year after they've had a background in basic biology of the human. And I think that this course is probably forgotten by the time the students get to their third year. Yeah. And that's probably...
so there are some medical schools that don't teach it at all, you're saying.
That's right. But, as we mentioned before, Daniel went to NYU, and he actually remembers, I think you said this, so I will say it again.
You gave the lecture.
I was down there to give at least one of the lectures, but if you check around the United States, I guess there's, about 127 medical schools now. Maybe 10% even mention some of the more important ones, like Toxoplasma, for instance, or Babesia.
They should assign the first 25 episodes of TWiP, where we went through each.
Why not?
Parasite, remember that?
Sure.
It's a listening.
No, we gave them the whole course, basically.
All there.
So it is all there if they wanted. I don't have a Coursera course on this, but apparently there is one out there because someone referred to it.
Someone was talking about it.
Yeah, there is. I actually checked out a little bit of it.
And what was that like?
I guess because I only checked out a little bit of it meant I didn't quite get as engaged as I would have liked. I mean, it did seem like a good course.
Good foundation.
It's probably because I'm busy.
Right.
No, and they, at least the few that I watched a few of these. I somehow downloaded and watched them while I was in St. John's. That's what I do on vacation. Watch parasitology courses.
Colored your view.
And they had clinicians who had, a lot of them actually were active in Africa, had seen, so when you when you were getting a case discussed, then they would talk to someone who had actually managed these cases. It was a good course. I'll go ahead and say it was a good course.
You went to St. John's?
I was in, I guess I travel a lot. I was there in February. We stayed at one of these eco resorts.
Oh, you didn't go to Caneal Bay?
We went there for the day. That's a nice place. Yeah, it is. We ran into some friends of ours staying at Caneal Bay. They seemed resort, a little...
It's a little bit of a snooty place.
Yeah, no, where we stayed was this eco resort on the far end of the island. So you stayed in these screened-in, a little bit more than a tent. Wow. And the way you got to shower and such is that you had this black drum and you would pump water into it and then it would somewhat warm through the day. And then you used a garden hose to shower off. And my daughter, Daisy, the one I just took out to Chicago, she has really long hair. And, of course, she covers it with conditioner and then tries to rinse it out. It's not coming out.
It's getting cold. All right, our last one's from Adam. Hello, my good sirs. In response to TWiP 88, unless the little 10-year bit is a red herring, I believe this may be Chagas disease, T. cruzi.
There's an interesting...
Quick story about why this comes to mind. A few years ago, I was in rural Nicaragua working on a water sanitation project. We had a Peace Corps volunteer accompany us, who woke everyone up in the middle of the night because she found one of the kissing bugs that we learned were vectors of T. cruzi. She explained that if we were to see one in the stable where we were staying, yes, we were sleeping in a converted stable, to trap it and find her so she could capture it and give it to the government health organization, presumably for epidemiological purposes. This raised lots of questions, and she had to explain that these bugs can give people a parasite that can cause sudden death 10 or 20 years after being bitten. Needless to say, this freaked a whole bunch of people out and kept them up all night. I, for one, thought it was fascinating, and it made me seek out more information about parasites when I got home. On the same trip, I went swimming barefoot in a lake with some locals. Spectacular idea, I know. I thought this was really great until I came out of the water and noticed that grass leading into the lake was littered with cow pies. Within 24 hours, I had some nasty diarrhea that passed within a day, which he took care of with Lomotil. Anyway, sorry for the lengthy reply and story. Thanks for all you do to promote science literacy. I'm a middle school science teacher in Chicago.
Oh, nice.
Who is applying to medical school this year. The podcast Trifecta give me lots of great lesson ideas for my kids and keep me intellectually stimulated after long, monotonous days. Keep up the incredible work.
Wow.
P.S. Is it weird that I hope I picked up some parasite in Central America? I went to school in Eugene, Oregon, which happens to be just about the grass pollen capital of the world around this time of year, and developed some severe allergies while there. It would be cool to see if they persist after my trip, my own little hygiene hypothesis experiment. And then he wrote just this morning, I emailed a hem-onc doc, it's hematology oncology, that I've been shadowing, who guesses that she has neurocysticercosis. The fact that she doesn't eat meat doesn't mean anything. It can be transmitted fecal-oral. Bingo. After researching this a little bit more and learning that T-solium is the leading cause of adult-onset epilepsy worldwide, it seems that it's a much better guess than Chagas disease. All right. So we had a bunch of neurocysticercosis. We had a little cerebral malaria, and then Chagas turned into some neurocysticercosis. What else we got, Daniel?
Well, let's remind everybody of the case, and then we'll go through it. As we told people last time, this was a 33-year-old woman from El Salvador who was brought to the ER, and as some of our email writers mentioned, this was after the second seizure. She had woke up in the morning, shaking, loss of consciousness, let out a yell, lost urine, basically a whole description consistent as we described with seizures. The family thought, well, okay, that's over. But then when it recurred at 5:30, they felt that maybe she should be brought to the ER. Let's see, did I tell you guys last time about the MRI of the brain? Do you remember?
You did not.
No, we didn't have that.
Okay, so that was one of the first things that was done.
So if someone has a seizure, you would just do that automatically?
In addition to blood work, which we did describe last time with this, we talked about the margination without a left shift, brain imaging would be pretty common, particularly first seizure.
But you do a neurologic examination first, yes?
And... yes, we did. And did I not tell you what that showed? But actually, and that is really important in the differential here. And I do think I mentioned last time that it was, I think I used the term non-focal. And I often listen to these podcasts after the fact to see, did I throw in any jargon? And what does non-focal mean? Non-focal meant that there was no localized areas of weakness. You know, I would have started to think of something different. Perhaps
like
maybe she had a hemiparesis or a left arm weakness, or you know. And we're on This Week in Parasitism, so we think about parasites. But when someone shows up in the ER, it could be a stroke.
Could be.
There's a lot. There's a lot in the differential in addition to parasites.
Can it be miliary tuberculosis?
You know, I wouldn't say miliary. Well, but it could be a tuberculoma, and
tuberculoma.
It could be a tuberculoma, and if you had this presentation in parts of Africa, they have like differentials, where, you know, I guess I'll mention some of the possibilities before we go much further. As our email writers say, Teneosolum, neurocysticercosis, is big on the differential.
It is.
Tuberculosis, a localized tuberculoma, toxoplasmosis. Those two, and I guess this will be the importance of the neuro exam, would often present with a localized weakness. So we had a similar presentation, but a localized weakness. And that has a little bit to do with how the parasites actually infect the brain, and whether they're going to be in the spaces creating a pressure, or whether they're actually going to be infiltrating into the actual parenchyma, the brain itself. So she did. This woman got a CT and then actually went on to get an MRI of the brain. And the MRI of the brain, I looked at the MRI. It was, I thought of taking, you know, making a little capture of it and showing it. This was a recent case, by the way. The MRI was read as showing multiple ring-enhancing lesions and one area of calcification.
Ring-enhancing lesions?
How many lesions were there?
Multiple.
Like, when you say multiple?
More than one.
Give us
six.
Six?
I'll say six.
Okay.
What is a ring-enhancing lesion?
Dickson, tell us. Dickson seems very excited about this.
A coin lesion, it's often referred to as a coin lesion also, particularly if it occurs in the lungs.
COIN?
Yeah, it looks like a coin.
I remember that.
It looks like a little
I remember that.
So these are ring enhancing. That means that it's got a border to it, which has a brighter appearance than the central part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That is true, and often, this one as I was looking through is perhaps not as classical on imaging as other ones that I've seen. Other ones will have this ring, this enhancing around the edge. It's dark and empty inside, and often you'll see something inside. You'll see it in sort of an object inside, which is interesting, and that makes this diagnosis different from some of the other diagnoses. Where you're not going to on imaging see the contents. You're actually seeing the contents here on.
Exactly.
And what are you seeing? What do you think we're possibly seeing now?
We are seeing the little hooklets. You can actually see inside of each egg the Hexacanth Tania solium larva. So there's Hexacanth. It's a Greek word, I guess, for 6 hooks. Right, a canth is like a hook or a tooth, and they have little barbs on them. In fact, if you look at the way they're constructed, they're almost like a fish hook. And they use these things once they hatch in the intestine to actually claw their way through the intestinal wall to enter the blood because they're very, 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 very small. Right, 60 microns about, and so that's how they make their way through the barrier to get bloodborne. And a lot of them, of course, go to the other organs besides brain. They go to heart, they go to muscle tissue, they go to liver. But the ones that do get up to into the brain, once they get trapped in a capillary, there's a thigmotactic response, which means they can feel pressure because they have a primitive nervous system, and they start to claw their way into the tissue. And that's how they enter to become the cyst stage that will later on become the one that...
I presume that clawing breaks the capillary, right?
Clawing breaks the capillary.
You said they're crawling from the capillary into the tissue. And you must get little bleeds, which are not good, right?
The interesting thing I'll say about, and this is a distinction, when they get into the brain, most often these are actually between the brain. They'll be down in the sulci, for instance. They're usually not going to actually burrow into the body, into the parenchyma of the brain.
Okay.
And that's advantageous in certain ways.
Or adventitious.
Adventitious? It's positive. It's good stuff. It could be worse.
It's a kind of tissue.
Because sometimes you'll see a lot of these, as we mentioned, half a dozen this time. And there's this concern, oh my gosh, are those holes in my brain?
Yeah, half a dozen just in the brain. You can imagine how many are distributed throughout the whole body.
They go elsewhere too?
Oh, absolutely. That's why it's called cysticercosis.
And neurocysticercosis.
And you can actually palpate, if you're a good physical examiner of a patient,
feel them.
You can feel these lumps.
Yeah.
And you can almost make the diagnosis there. You could biopsy very easily. Because it's harder to do in the brain, of course.
But you didn't notice any lumps in this patient.
They probably didn't even do that.
No.
Did they do a complete physical?
But I think they did. But I think that a lot of the widespread nature of this is probably was not as much appreciated as it currently is.
Okay.
I mean, it goes all over the place. And I think we could say this for your buddy Racaniello diagnosis. Really, it goes all over the place.
You bet. But it only stays in one place.
Yes.
In the brain?
No, in striated skeletal muscle.
So these forms can go through striated skeletal muscle.
They can go anywhere. That's right.
They don't want to be there, though, right? They're not going to be.
They don't care.
And to be transmitted, they would have to be eaten.
Correct.
So that's the end, right?
Yeah.
For humans, anyway.
Well, no, we eat. Well, for humans, yes and no. It depends on where you are.
Who eats people these days?
Hey, remember this book I told you about early on in our discussions called New Guinea Tapeworms and Jewish Grandmothers?
Yes, I do.
Well, guess what?
Well, that was New Guinea, the 4 people, right?
And they eat other people.
Not anymore. We stopped that because they were getting prion disease.
At least they don't admit to it any longer. But.
Well, I think, wasn't that the research of Jared Diamond that still is a little bit of cannibalism going on? Because there was...
Yeah. He works
also,
down there,
wow, why am I blocking on his name? The author of that book.
It was also done during World War II, of course.
Yeah.
It had been much more prevalent.
All right. Well, anyway.
Robert Desowitz. I'm sorry. Robert Desowitz was the name of the person who wrote the book.
Right. I remember that very well. The ones in the brain will go away eventually.
They'll die.
They'll calcify.
We should talk about that. But I think before we talk about
are we correct first?
Well, what do you think, Dickson?
Well, I think it's pretty pathognomonic, but
and actually, it is actually. We're not going to biopsy this thing.
No, but you could do a test.
They did do serology. They did a test, and that was positive.
Okay, fine.
But now our listeners can come back and say, "But you told me she didn't eat meat."
Exactly.
And I think this is the pearl that we should remember.
One of these writers got it right, though. They said it's not important because that's not how you catch it.
And this is maybe something that we should have asked. We asked this question. She brought it up voluntarily. Did you eat meat? But I think the question is, do you eat stool? Have you consumed stool?
But it's always a negative.
And there's two types of people. There's the people that say no and do, and there's the people that admit that they do. I mean, unfortunately, there is fecal contamination, and it gets in our food, and it gets in our water, and
right.
and we even do counts, right? Oh, the coliform count is below the certain level. You can drink the water. So it's not that we avoid consuming stool. It's just we like to minimize it. And unfortunately, in this case, she consumed stool. And it didn't matter. You could be a strict vegetarian. And this is that great story about the Jewish families in Brooklyn that got it. Right. You do not get this disease from eating meat. You get this disease from eating eggs that are in feces, in stool.
Right. You told that story on one of our TWiPs.
But I can modify this a little bit, if Daniel will allow.
I'll allow.
Because the segments themselves, when they break off, are independently motile. And when they migrate past the anal sphincter, or as I used to refer to it, the organ of Agnew, that's an old reference to Spiro Agnew and anal sphincters, etc. So as they migrate past the anal sphincter, which can be held very tightly bound by normal reflexes, these segments can narrow themselves and spread out on the other side. And when they do so, they express eggs onto the perianum. Now, that's not feces, is it?
It's eggs.
It's just eggs.
Yeah.
So now let's assume that there's some allergic reaction.
You scratch yourself.
And now they're under your fingernails.
Right. It's kind
still
of
not
like,
feces, but still eggs. Yeah, exactly right. So there was a housekeeper in Brooklyn that probably had that kind of a scenario rather than fecal contamination, because they found eggs all over her entire body, and she harbored an adult tapeworm of Taenia solium. So it's not always the feces that can be the culprit here. So what if she said, no, I never ingest feces? Well, how would she know, of course? None of us.
And I never put my fingers in my mouth.
I don't want to know, okay? But the fact of the matter is she encountered the eggs, and that's all that's important, because those eggs are immediately infectious. That's the deal.
So this is another reason to have good hand hygiene, especially after coming out of a public bathroom.
But
and I mean, the challenge is not only do you have to have good hand hygiene, but everyone who's preparing your food, everything you consume, they also have to have.
It's interesting because we were having a discussion on TWiM.
Okay.
Someone wrote in, who is a free market libertarian. He said we should not require restaurant employees to wash their hands.
Should not?
Should not.
Should not?
Okay.
Let me know which ones they want to go to, and I don't want to eat there.
Well, he said it will naturally, the restaurants that have a lot of contamination will naturally be shut down, so you don't have to enforce it. It will happen on its own.
Do you really think so?
And so we've had a discussion. A lot of people are writing in, and he's countering it today when we record later. But this seems to me...
Yeah.
You don't want to get this, right?
Did you see that special on the... no, you don't watch television. That's okay. There was a special on the Bill Moyers show, Frontline, about the Foster's chicken processing plants and the outbreak of salmonella. They had to bend over backwards 3 times to prove that that's where it was coming from. This plant would not shut down, although they knew that's where it was coming from. They had to be within the letter of the law. They had to have a patient with some uneaten chicken that tested positive for the exact strain that they caught, which made them sick, in order to prove that it came from Foster's and no place else. Can you imagine the way those laws are constructed? That's crazy, crazy. So all employees must wash hands before leaving bathroom is just, totally unenforceable.
It's unenforceable, but it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing.
I would get a certain percent of people.
I wouldn't advocate for doing the opposite, and I'd like to know who that is. That's not Mark Rubio by any chance, is it? And that's going to get
Can
letters.
neurocystic psychosis kill you?
Yes, it most definitely can.
Will she have fits her whole life?
Well, let's talk about it. So to finish off, and before we get to that, to finish off the infection. So the infection requires somebody eating the meat and getting the tapeworm in the intestine, and then the eggs. And we now realize about 10%, as Dickson was bringing, about 10% of people that get neurocysticercosis have the worms in their intestines,
Exactly.
raising the possibility that they're infecting themselves, and also raising the clinical issue that not only do you want to treat these forms that are causing the neurocysticercosis, but you also want to use some sort of an agent that will get rid of the adult tapeworm from the intestine.
Right.
Now, there are several stages to neurocysticercosis, and one of the things we like to do when you're going to treat these people clinically is break them down into these 4 main stages. And I don't always remember these, so I bring my notes. But let me just
that he took while he was a student at NYU.
Yes, these are from Dickson. They're written. I can hardly.
I never
read
lectured
them.
on that parasite.
I can hardly read them. They're in the first edition of his parasitic textbook. The first is what we call the vesicular stage, and there isn't much of a host reaction. This is very early on in the infection, but then later you develop this colloidal vesicular stage, and later it's going to get granular, finally nodular. And the nodular is going to be when it's probably calcified and you're near at the end. And we used to say at that point, oh, it's over, don't worry about it. But there have been some recent studies suggesting that treatment at that stage may actually decrease the potential for seizures down the road. But looking at these stages, if it's really at, I would say almost at any point now, we're getting sort of subtleties of treatment, you want to get rid of the worms. You want to kill them rather than let it progress. But at the same time, you do have to, as some of our emailers commented, you do have to worry about the host response. When you start to treat and you have dead, dying parasites, that's when the host is really going to respond. You can actually increase your risk of seizures, and you can get a lot of edema, and often we'll use steroids in conjunction. And
so it's interesting, in this particular case, there was no focal lesion that you could say it's in this part of the brain and is affecting this motion or this eyesight, because very frequently it is in some part of the brain. When the organism loses its control over your immune system, the larva inside actually secretes anti-inflammatory agents, which keeps down the swelling of the brain due to inflammation. But when they start to die and they lose their ability to keep the immune system at bay, that's when it's almost like it's analogous to killing a dying fly with a gigantic hammer. It's going to die anyway, but our immune system is, let me in, coach, let me in, I can kill it. But it's already dying. No, I still want to kill it. And when it does, of course, it induces this huge swelling, and the swelling places pressure on normal parts of the brain, which then results in symptomatology and diagnosis. So steroids given along with the treatment to kill off the rest of these still alive cysts is something that most clinicians would recommend.
And seizure medicine.
And seizure medicine.
Here's a woman, she's seizing already.
Right.
You treat this. You're not going to make that better right away. You're going to make it worse right away.
That's right.
And so anti-seizure medicine, steroids, and albendazole, which is probably the best penetrating.
So what do you say about the 10-year incubation period?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a challenge, actually. You would usually think of this as going through its entire progression, I would say on average in 5 or 6 years. 10 years is within the possibility. So it's not clear to me when I hear this case whether or not she acquired this from somebody in the household who brought this, or whether this is just a very long duration.
Yeah, you can't carbon date these and find out how old each one is, unfortunately.
Right.
So, but 10 years, I've heard 10 years is the maximum time that these things stay alive, and then they start to die, and when they do, that's when the symptoms start.
Well, this has nothing to do with this, but a man recently died in Texas of variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and he had lived in the UK in the 90s during the mad cow disease outbreak, and he's been incubating since then.
Wow.
Long incubation period.
Wow,
that's why no one who lived in the UK during that time is allowed to give blood ever.
Yes,
that's incredible.
I was reminded because I gave a lecture in my course on prions the other day, and one of the students came up afterwards. She said, "Yeah, I lived in the UK then, and I'm not allowed to give blood."
That's incredible. But if you're a little kid and you lived then and you just forgot about it as an adult, you're going to give blood.
Forgot about it.
I mean, they actually have it. They have
that.
it on the form, so you'd have to read that and not check the box.
Yeah, but what if you were 2 years old?
Is there a box that says, were you in the UK during this time?
Yes, they do.
What if you were 2 years old when that happened? Are they going to actually remember that?
Even though we don't physically remember where we were when we were 2, usually somebody's told us.
No, but I know that. But they.
By the way, Daniel, when you came back from the UK, you had visited a farm. Did you check the box on the form? I visited a farm.
Nobody does.
You didn't check it? Oh my God!
I'm on the air. You're going to get me in trouble. Of course, I'm sure I did that. That would be a problem if I didn't.
And what did they
animal
do?
or vegetable material with you?
Did they ask you any questions?
No, nobody.
Did they run any ELISAs?
No.
All right. So we're going to do some email so that we can get through some of them instead of a paper, and then we'll come back and do a case study.
Cool. Yep.
What do you think?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. The first one is from someone who didn't give their name, but they sent a link to an article and said, this is a review, but is gamma interferon the intrinsic factor described by Dickson versus Leishmania? So this is an article, interferon gamma in Leishmaniasis.
Right.
Is that
It's possible
factor,
that's
Dickson?
the older term because they didn't know what it was. They called it.
What was the effect of this?
The intrinsic factor was to reverse the post-Calais-Azar dermal leishmaniasis effect by extracting these from macrophages. So they could have been extracting gamma interferon at that point, and it could have worked. Yeah, it's possible.
Do Macs make interferon gamma? I know T cells do.
Do macrophages?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We think of T cells as the main, but no, you can get
Macs
it from.
can do it too. Okay, it could be.
Could be.
Thank you. AJ sent in a letter. It's a bit late about our previous case study, which he said is Leishmaniasis. So,
Right.
Sorry about that. But he says Italy is an unreasonable place, though it's not terribly common. I'm not sure if Hep C would tie into that. Dickson kept asking about fish and beaches, which made me consider Vibrio and mycobacteria, but those are outside the scope of TWiP. Okay, keep up the work. I love the clinical cases, although this is the first time I've had any clue. Okay. I'm going to go through these guesses. Grace. No, this is very interesting. This is from Grace, who also wrote us today.
That's right.
Dear TWiP team, this attempt at cracking the case is a joint effort. It comes to you from a duo of small mammal biologists searching for enzootic plague out in west central Idaho.
Okay.
There's no good radio stations. Downloading episodes of TWiP and TWiV for our long commute to the field each day helps keep us sane.
Outstanding.
So they researched what we thought were the pertinent clues in a sunny cafe in Boise. And they guessed Leishmaniasis.
Nice.
Thanks for the great podcast. It's lots of fun for those of us in the uncertain purgatory that is the time between undergrad and grad school to have a reason to use our brains again. It's best wishes, Boobos from Idaho.
Boobos from Idaho. That's clever. That's very clever. These must be a hoot to party with. That's all I can tell you.
Now, I'll read the next one, Dickson, because this is from someone that you won't want to read.
Oh, okay.
This is from George Cross, actually.
Come on.
Whose paper we did a couple weeks ago. This was the trypanosome where they looked at mRNAs and they found the unusual or unsuspected finding that many variant surface antigen mRNAs are present at any given time, right?
Right.
So George writes, "Hi, Vinny. Nice discussion brought to my attention by Monica, who was a co-author on that paper. Of course, I had to explain the story to everyone in the lab. Bit more to it than you told, thankfully. This is the story of him picking up roadkill.
I hope he didn't eat it afterwards.
Do we know what the extra was?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
he actually got stopped for speeding on the way with this thing in the back,
Eek.
and he was afraid the cop was going to see it,
yeah,
and arrest him because you're not supposed to shoot, things and stuff. So anyway, he didn't see it. That was the rest of the story.
Great.
Because, as he says, best wishes to you and my ex-postdoc, which is my wife, Doris.
Right.
I showed this to her, and she said, yeah, he got a speeding ticket, and he was really...
well.
Thank you, George. It's cool that the Cross Lab listens to TWiP, don't you think, Dickson?
I think it's great. Hello, George.
Can you read the next one from Candace?
Sure. Candace writes, greetings, Team TWiP. I've been a long-time listener of TWiV and TWiM, but didn't give TWiP the time it deserves. I recently got back into my podcast, and I'm finding TWiP very informative and the case study format enjoyable. I just finished TWiP 85, and I have a, in parentheses, small correction/update for you. When you mentioned fungi, and yes, a TWiF would be amazing, and commented that Arturo Casadevall would be a great resource, you referenced his position at Einstein. Well, Arturo is no longer at Einstein, but rather has accepted a new position at Johns Hopkins. I have included a link to the announcement for the new chair of microbiology and immunology at Einstein, as well as Dr. Casadevall's profile page at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. I agree that Dr. Casadevall's knowledge of fungi and co-infection, such as with HIV, would be an excellent resource for a podcast. I also very much enjoy his imagination and abstract thinking. I always made a point of attending his lectures while we were at Einstein, and then she gives a couple of references. Also, my guess for the case study for TWiP is Cryptosporidium. It is my understanding that a standard O&P will not catch this, as well as an acid-fast stain will. I say this with the caveat that it has been many years since I took microbiology.
Which one was this, crypto?
It was the diarrhea, the
that
young
was a
lady out in
pinworm.
Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody got that one.
Nobody got that one. So I was a PhD student at Einstein and had the pleasure of meeting and attending this student lunch with Dr. Racaniello following his lecture there a couple of years ago. It was a great experience for all the students who attended. Thank you so much for taking time to do these kind of things. I also have some input/experience about to postdoc or not to postdoc, a topic that has come up on other TWiCs. I started my PhD fairly positive and excited about nurturing my love of science, but as the story often goes, I soon became frustrated and distraught about my experiments and my time spent in lab. I often thought about leaving the program and taking a position doing something else, but I never knew quite what. Thankfully, my husband would not let me quit. He reminded me that he, my son, and I didn't sell our house and move to the Bronx just so I could end up quitting. When it came to time to defend my PhD and graduate, I took some time to myself and tried to picture myself doing many alternative science careers. None of them really got me fired up like doing wet bench work does. So with some very careful research into labs and candid advice from scientists in the field, let me insert a very important message here. While the word networking makes many scientists groan, its importance is so incredibly understated. Trust me, you'll appreciate it when a network connection gets you a job. I applied to and at the recommendation of a networking connection and was offered a position as a postdoc in Paul Nyam's lab at the University of Washington. So I had to ask myself the very important question, can I see myself doing anything else with my life? And while things like travel the world and run a dog rescue do pop into my head, I fundamentally still want to be able to contribute to make lives better, and I just love doing science. What can I say? Yes, the postdoc life is hard, the pay stinks, and I can't afford to live in Seattle with the family, so I commute. More time to listen to TWiCs, and I keep long hours, but I have never loved a job as much as I loved the one I now have. For most of my PhD work, I dreaded going into lab, and now I can't wait to get there. For me, it was all in an identifying what is fundamentally most important to me and what gets me fired up, to quote my PI. I have the fortunate opportunity to work with an amazing PI, an MD PhD, who is involved in numerous clinical trials. I get to meet the patients whose lives we're trying to make a difference in. I get to be on the cutting edge of research, immunotherapy, T-cell transfer, PD-1, PD-L1 therapy, and see how it impacts people's lives, and get to do many of the correlative studies on patient samples, and I get to do basic science. How cool is that? Additionally, because much of our research involves around patients, I work with a large team of MD fellows, research scientists, and MD PhDs. Both of the students in my lab are MD PhDs, as well as undergraduate researchers. All of these groups ask questions I wouldn't normally think of and inspire me to broaden my point of view. Dr. Nyam has a reputation as an excellent mentor and attracts all kinds of bright people. I feel very fortunate to be included in this group. Additionally, I used your TWiV episode 160, More Tumor Viruses, as a launching point to prepare myself for applying to the lab I'm now in. The Nyam lab seeks to understand the immune response to the Merkel polyomavirus T antigens in Merkel cell carcinoma and leverage it for patient treatment. I get to use my PhD training in T-cell biology to tackle a problem that profoundly affects people with this rare, some 2,000 cases a year in the United States, but so far often fatal cancer. I don't know what I will be doing after my postdoc, but I will be able to move on knowing that I made the choice that was right for me. Keep up all the great Twix. Cheers, Candace. Great letter. Was I pronouncing his name right, Paul Nyam?
Yeah, I was going to say it would be nice when people write in with names, just maybe to put in a little way of pronouncing it.
Nyam, I would guess.
A little phonetic.
Weather.
I completely forgot to mention today's weather in my previous email. We had mostly sunny skies, and I have 21C in Seattle today. It was beautiful.
So that's the key here. You can't imagine doing anything else. That's what I tell people all the time. Then you can do science. But if you can think of doing something else, forget about it.
Then you're conflicted.
Do it. Do that other thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Daniel, take the next one from Peter. Yeah, this is good.
Peter writes, doctors. Isn't that nice?
It is.
First, I also am enjoying the new format. As I type this, 60 Minutes is doing a story about treating glioblastoma with polio virus. I remember the measles virus story on TWiP. I would like your opinion on my water treatment strategy. Shouldn't Dickson be reading this? I'll read it.
No.
I had a pump water filter, and it was relatively easy to pump because the carbon filter was not fine enough to filter viruses. It did fine with cysts and most bacteria. I also had crystalline iodine in a saturated water solution. The bottle had an LCD thermometer on the side, so I knew how to adjust the amount of solution to use depending on the temperature. My strategy was to treat a gallon or so of water with iodine to kill any viruses, bacteria, and then filter the water to remove cysts and the iodine taste. What do you think? Also, I heard that leaving water in a clear plastic bottle in the sun for a couple of hours is helpful, but that would not kill the cysts, would it? Actually, I'm going to comment back once I finish. Finally, I wanted to ask what the kid who went to Kenya was eating before he went to his trip. Sushi? Anything unusual? It would be cool if he actually acquired a parasite before he went to Kenya. I listened to every TWiP, TWiV, and TWIM, but I am an engineer by education, aerospace, and by nature. Thanks for all your work. So a couple, the clear plastic bottle in the sun is actually a very common way that they use UV to purify water in the third world. And they take soda bottles and they paint the one side of it black, and then they set them up on the rooftop. And what they're doing is they're basically using a UV form of water purification. So there is a strategy that's used there. Try to figure out where all this water purification is going on. Maybe he's heading up in the mountains and he's doing this. But I'm not sure when you filter, you're going to get rid of the iodine taste. What we often did when we were using iodine for purification was we bring some kind of a drink powder, like a Tang
Sure.
Well, maybe he has some charcoal in this filter.
Tang.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah. But what do you think, Dickson, about? So he says first he's using the iodine. He's killing all the viruses, bacteria.
UV radiation won't kill a non-dividing stage of a parasite, though, right? It has to be in the process of unwinding its DNA.
What about iodine?
Not into the cysts.
No,
it's not effective.
Filtration?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then he's filtering, so he's getting...
That's effective. So the ones you should be worried about are the ones you can filter already. You said that you can filter out bacteria and protozoans. So it's just the viruses that you're worried about. And you answer the question then, would UV light in a bottle of water kill viruses?
The plastic is going to stop most of the UV, actually.
Right.
Because we have these cell culture dishes,
Sure.
which are thin plastic, and UV will not go through it. So I doubt it would go through a water bottle.
Right, I think you might be right.
You need to put the UV right on top of the medium to inactivate viruses.
There's an open pail of water, maybe, yes.
But then it doesn't go very far into the water.
That's right.
So when we inactivate viruses, we have to spread the solution so there's no more than a few millimeters thick. Otherwise, it doesn't penetrate.
You wonder about the heat. I mean, if you can get above, let's say, 65 degrees, I mean, are they getting these bottles hot enough? I mean, I wonder if he's really going to stop somewhere long enough to really let the bottle. Because I think they want like 8 or more hours of sunlight on the water to accomplish this.
I don't know how you would get that, because you're going to be during the day. You're going to be moving around, right?
It's not effective. I think the most effective is filtration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if he's using the
or if they boil it, if they boil it when you're camped out and you're not at a certain height of elevation, then you can kill it.
So
the Kenya was the pinworm, was that right?
That was the pinworm
Okay.
guy. I think the one before actually was our cryptosporidium case.
Yes.
So I think she was right.
Yeah,
on
that's
that.
right.
Okay. All right, we have a long one here from Matthew. I didn't know where to put this because he sent it to both TWiP and TWiM. He addressed it to me and you, Dickson.
I see that.
He's a longtime listener, and he's thanking us. He's an MD working in Switzerland in emergency and internal medicine.
All right.
And he's taking part in a research project at a district hospital in Democratic Republic of the Congo. Observation of the previous years has been the incidence of diabetes among the mostly impoverished rural population has rapidly increased, and that the course of disease is fairly complication-laden, which overwhelms the fairly resource-constrained biomedical infrastructure.
I take it he's talking about type 1 diabetes.
The aim of the study is to assess the collective of diabetic patients in regards to their lifestyle, socioeconomic, demographics, knowledge of disease, etc. Try to optimize treatment guidelines. We're also trying to put forth and validate hypotheses to explain the rapid increase in disease burden, and it's regarding this that I am addressing you. It's an anecdotal observation, although to my knowledge not proven by any study, that in Central Africa, women of childbearing age with a certain frequency tend to have a significant weight gain, mostly around the waistline, without necessarily becoming frankly obese in the proper sense. I'm not sure where I picked this up. I believe it was Professor Despommier in a TWiP or possibly Urban Ag, or even TWiM, or even somewhere else. I can't remember.
It's embedded deep in
He says, I'm under time constraints and bandwidth. I can't download the episodes. So the theory put forward was, in a paraphrased form, that in tropical environments, women of childbearing age had an above-average amount of visceral adipose tissue, which would have a certain pro-inflammatory effect and consequently should stimulate the immune system to be more active in pathogen recognition and elimination. Sense of this phenomenon, so far as a teleologic approach is permitted, would be that the potential low-grade tuberculosis infection could be kept at bay better and be less consumptive, permitting the women to have more bodily reserves and have lower risks for stillbirths and so forth. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Do you remember talking about this?
Boy, I sure don't. Nope. That was not from me. I didn't know any of that.
All right, well, I'll have to run it by Schechter on TWiM. All right, so Alex had episode 85 guess, which is not Giardia. I don't remember what 85 was. Does anyone remember? Let's look. Microbeworld.org/what, Dickson?
What? I'm sorry, what?
It's all right. Don't worry about it.
I was moving on to the next letter.
Episode 85 was the crayfish thing.
Yeah, Paragonimus.
Paragoniomyces. All right. And now I think we can have you read Whitney's, Dickson. There we
Whitney's or Alex's?
go. Alex, it was just a guess at
Just
a case.
a quick
It's
little
fine.
guess.
All right, so I'll read Whitney. Whitney writes, Hi, Professors Despommier, Racaniello, and Griffin. I hope this email finds you well. It is 61 degrees and humid in College Station, Texas. As a graduate student and as an aspiring parasitologist, I thoroughly enjoy your podcast, and I am always delighted by Dickson's wisdom and enthusiasm. Ooh, I just broke my arm patting myself on the back. I am especially interested in parasites that are found in natural populations of animals and how parasite burdens might impact reproductive fitness. This is my first time emailing the show, but I have a good excuse to contact all of you because I found a paper that was just released online yesterday in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society that I thought would be an interesting article to discuss in the podcast. In this paper, 2 researchers from Notre Dame, that's a great school, by the way, complete a meta-analysis on the effects of social status on parasite burdens and on immunity. I thought that their findings were an interesting contribution to the parasitological literature. Here's the link for your convenience, and I think I actually remember seeing that. I'm a big fan of the show and listen to your podcasts while I'm counting parasites under a microscope. Great. That's a great thing to do, by the way. I spent half of my PhD doing that. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. Which parasites are you counting? I'd love to know that. maybe writing us again will tell us.
The name of this paper is Social Status, Immune Response, and Parasitism in Males, a Meta-Analysis.
Interesting.
Yeah, I read this paper, actually. Who knows why, but,
Yeah.
And
What did you think of it?
I remember it being kind of negative. Like, they had this idea that men of higher social status would have different parasite burdens than, I think
Are they looking in less developed countries for these differences?
It was actually, if I remember. I remember it actually sort of coming out kind of like we didn't find anything, if I remember this paper correctly. They had all kinds of ideas. They were going to find differences in TH1, TH2.
It's okay to find no difference. Then they did a whole bunch of studies, and that doesn't affect the outcome. That's still a good result.
Yeah, it was neither the trade-offs hypothesis nor the stress response hypothesis were well supported. Neither dominant nor subordinate males consistently demonstrated reduced immunity. It was sort of an interesting idea.
Who are the authors?
Dickson, Despommier.
No.
It was not Dickson. So it was Bobby Habib and Elizabeth A. Archie.
Okay.
And they're, as mentioned, they're at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I don't know those two people. Newly arrived, perhaps.
I mean, there's a ton of data that they went through.
That's good. No, I think, if that's their hypothesis and they did the meta-analysis correctly and it turned out to not have a correlation, that's as important as having a correlation.
I think it's fine. All right, Peter writes... No, I'm sorry, you're Daniel. Daniel's next, sorry.
Peter writes?
Yes.
Hi, TWiP team. Peter writes.
Right.
I don't think you have covered this tragic case on TWiP. 2 kidney transplant patients died from meningoencephalitis due to infection with Halocephalus gingivalis nematodes. The patients had each received a kidney from a donor who was an alcoholic, rough sleeper who died from meningitis. As Halocephalus gingivalis is so rare, it was not something that was checked for. 6 other hospitals had rejected the organs due to the donor's medical history. I assumed that the patients would have been on immune suppressant drugs, and this allowed the nematode infection to propagate, I think that's rapidly, unchecked by their immune systems. Is this something you're familiar with?
I have never heard of this entity before this moment.
Really?
Ever. This is a new one for me.
Halocephalobulus. I have never heard of this either. Let's look it up.
Don't have a clue. Gingivalis.
Yes, a free-living nematode.
Free-living nematode. Excuse me?
Not a parasite.
It's not a parasite. It's an incidental finding.
It says it's a facultative parasite
of horses.
Well,
what does that mean, Dickson?
It means that under some rare conditions, it can become a pathogen. I'll buy that. So this is a zoonotic infection from horses?
It's just a parasite of horses and humans.
So why does it call them a free-living parasite?
It's associated with swampland environments.
I don't get it.
Well, I don't think they know where it's living. It's free-living in the swamps, and it can infect horses and people.
Can infect horses.
Apparently.
All right. So like a strongyloides-like kind of thing.
It dwells in soil, plants, and other organically rich environments.
I've never heard of this
Sometimes found in horses. It has been transmitted between humans by transplant. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, we're here to educate and to learn.
Wow, that's interesting. So they were immunosuppressed, right? So
yeah.
This is a problem. And
so how did it get into the kidneys of this patient?
Well, they died. This guy died from
meningoencephalitis.
Yeah, so in the brain, but they were getting kidney. How did they get in his kidney? Yeah.
No. How did it get into the donor's
kidney? Right. I don't know. But
the donor was an alcoholic who died from meningitis also.
Yeah.
So does this worm, like Angiostrongylus, cause a meningitis-like syndrome?
I think it does.
Okay. So that's maybe it's in that group of weird nematode infections that are transitional. I think you'd call them transitional. I think strongyloides falls into that category. It has a free-living stage and a parasitic stage, and this is a tragic incidental finding. Obviously, I agree with them. And we've just added another entity to the list of many things that we have to be on the watch out for.
So, Daniel, when you're getting an organ for transplant, it's not checked for every possible infectious agent, right?
Unfortunately, you really can't.
No time, right?
And you have a limited amount of time.
Yeah. And
occasionally you will see, say, odd things like this. You'll even see certain, speaking of TWiP, certain fungi that you just really haven't heard much about, but all of a sudden it shows up. Because sometimes people, there was a case I remember where this donor had been in a motor vehicle accident and it had gone off the road and ended up, in the ditch. And so the person had died in this water in the ditch. And then when they transplanted the organ, it was actually a fungus that had been acquired. So, there's a limited number of organs out there. So sometimes these things will happen.
So they obviously, these organs can have cytomegalovirus, right? And like everyone does.
Quite often they can have, yes.
Then you get immunosuppressed and you have big problems with that, right? And you have to get in your ID transplant team.
We had a patient just, not too long back, who got an HIV-infected kidney. So a lot of viruses, fungi. Sometimes people actually die of bacterial sepsis. Will transplant the organ anyway. And then you find out, and you treat them with antibiotics. That you can usually treat through.
Right.
But it's the fungi, the viruses, and something like this that...
Yeah.
I don't know, if someone died of meningitis, you would not necessarily reject it on that basis. I mean, some hospitals did, obviously.
So they actually have criteria. It depends upon the pathogen, depends how long the person has been treated. It's sort of interesting to say if they died of meningitis. This is usually someone you'd have to have cleared, and then you might consider.
Well, there's a lot of people out there that have acquired not Lyme disease, West Nile virus, who have had neurologic symptoms. They recover from it. And there are cases of organ donation by these people who spread Lyme or
West Nile,
particularly kidneys.
Yeah, that's right.
They found it. I don't know if you remember, we did this story on TWiP. They found it excreted in urine for a long time after recovery. West Nile virus.
How about that?
Persists in the kidney.
How about that?
I have a friend at Penn who's a transplant ID person, and she said if we rejected organs for
based
various,
on all these things,
we wouldn't have any organs.
It's probably
Yeah,
right.
no, it is. When you get a room of ID docs, they want to reject every organ because it's got it. But the transplant docs are, they see this and they realize we've got a person who needs the organ, and they need the organ for a valid reason.
We need to be able to build organs, don't we?
You got it right. We could do stem cell research with scaffolding and make any organ you want.
Let's do one more.
Yeah, just one more. Just
I like that. I like that one because it's regarding Dickson eating snow and crow.
Just go ahead. Go ahead.
And then we'll get on to our case. This is from Ken, who is in Snohomish, Washington. R.E. Dickson
Beautiful
eating
spot.
snow and crow. I was listening to TWiP 86 as I was bicycling home from work yesterday. On a beautiful, clear Seattle evening, Mount Rainier was out in full glory behind me as I was headed down the bike path. Then, Dickson stated that it would be safe to eat glacial ice. I can see this guy on his bike.
He nearly fell into the Snohomish
I've
River.
spent a fair amount of time hiking and climbing Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and camping on the glaciers, and I would never drink melted glacial ice without treating it. Perhaps freshly fallen snow might be safe, but most of the ice in glaciers accumulates in layers over a couple of decades. There are lots of organisms living in the ice, colorful algae, ice worms, ice spiders, and bacteria. The ice has been used as landing spots for countless flocks of birds and as burrowing material for marmots at the lower elevations, as well, of course, as a highway for touristing humans. I suppose the ice might host giardia or other nasty bugs, although I've never seen any solid research on that. In addition, glacier ice is chock full of ground rock due to the action of carving away the glacial valleys. Treating melted ice, glacial ice, is a real pain. The silt clogs filters, and boiling adequately at altitude requires you to carry lots of extra fuel in your already too heavy backpack. Furthermore, the water actually tastes pretty crappy due to the high mineral content. But everyone I met traveling on the glaciers spent the time and energy to treat the melted ice. We generally boiled our water 15 to 20 years ago, just as lightweight backpacking filters were being developed, and then added lots of flavored electrolyte glucose powder, which you had mentioned. I always laugh at the many bottled water companies that tout that their water comes from glaciers. I'm sure it has gone through some severe processing to make it safe and palatable for the average buyer. Love the shows, love Dickson's insight and stories, and love the case studies. Keep up the great work.
Well, I can address this issue personally because, number one, I've drunk the water on the Columbia Glacier in Alberta, and they take you right up on the ice, and there's these beautiful, clear rivers of melting water, and they just dip into it and give you some.
How did it taste?
It's fantastic. It was amazing. I've never heard of an outbreak of anything.
Around the corner, there's a spigot feeding.
Exactly.
No,
and they're
no.
pumping. Here come the
No.
tourists. Turn on the
The
hose.
second experience I've got is down in Patagonia. We were on the Merino Glacier near Lake Argentina, and you go up on this glacier, and at one point in this tour that they take you on, you get to this bottom platform on the glacier. There's a table, there's a bottle of something, and there's a bunch of glasses with some clear ice in it that they've carved out of this glacier, and this bottle turns out to be a bottle of 12-year-old scotch. And they pour the scotch over the ice, and then everybody drinks. And as far as I know, no one ever got sick doing that either. So these are anecdotal.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
It's touristy stuff.
The glacier melt that comes out of the bottom of the glacier, I totally agree with. It's milky. It's like a bluish milky color. I wouldn't go near that. But up on the glacier itself, where you've got these beautiful rivulets of absolutely pure, pristine, 1,000-year-old water that's coming, or maybe even older than that, coming out of the glacier, I would absolutely approve of that. I think if you did a chemical analysis or a microbiological analysis, you wouldn't find anything at all in them.
Now, Dickson, haven't you seen Smilla's Sense of Snow?
I have, actually. That's a little bit of a science fiction-y thing, but it's
Aren't there horrible parasites we need to worry about?
Well, only the ones in that movie, thank God.
Locked away in the glacier from hundreds of years ago.
No, that's sad but untrue. Sad but untrue.
I don't like glaciers. I have a phobia. My one phobia
Really?
is of glaciers.
But you're a mountain climber.
Well, that's where it came from. I mean, that is the death you do not want. You do not want to be down in one of those chasms.
No, I hear that.
But I will say,
You meant a crevasse.
I was up in Alaska a couple of years ago.
Right.
And it was actually the last time I was up there. And we did this trip. And on the trip, we passed by this glacier. Yeah. And there's a river that goes by the front of this glacier. And this glacier calves into the river.
Oh, my.
So you actually have to time it, because if one of these big chunks calves off, all the water of the river will go flying up, and you include it onto the shore and the trees.
Wow.
But in this river are floating these huge pieces of the glacier that have
water.
fallen off.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between the surface of the glacier
Here.
and that sort of wonderful, deep underside. And so when these things fall off, they'll often rotate in such a way that it exposes that underside. And we would chip off chunks of that nice, clear glacial ice to use to put in our drinks. And we wouldn't treat that. But the other stuff, the surface stuff of glaciers, I agree with that. That is nasty.
I totally agree with him. I wouldn't go near that stuff either. But the glacial melt that comes, like in the middle of the summer on the Columbia Glacier, and you'd crank it also, they actually make bottles of water available for you. You can take those home.
Well, we'll let Ken deal with it.
Yeah, that's exactly. The choice is yours, Ken.
Yeah, so Ken, the nasty stuff don't drink that. But if you can
obviously,
get down,
Obviously, he's had a different experience.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You have to use your best judgment on
Two
this.
quickies. One, Anthony sends us a link to the Meguro Parasitological Museum in Japan.
All right.
I don't know if this has been already featured or how it's rated. So we've talked about this on TWiP. I actually have a cell phone dongle thing with a trypanosome on it. Someone brought me from there. It's a wonderful museum. Have you been?
I haven't been, but I've seen pictures on the Google Images of married couples standing next to big tapeworms, jars of tapeworms, getting their marriage pictures taken.
I'd love to go. Someday I'm going to go back to Japan. I'll go to that.
I would like to go there too.
And last one from Jesse, who writes, "Dear hosts of TWiP, this week in pronunciation, regarding the way to say apoptosis. Some people, I think we discussed this. Some people say apoptosis.
Right.
Some people say apoptosis.
Right.
It's true that the P is silent in ptosis, but it was brought to my attention that when there is a prefix in front of the silent P, it is no longer silent. Compared pterodactyl and archaeopteryx.
There you go.
Or helicopter. So I have to say, writing my textbook, my colleagues told me I was boorish to say apoptosis. Boorish. I mean, they made me feel like an idiot. How could you pronounce it that way? It's obviously silent.
Apoptosis.
Would you say ptosis? Ptosis? No? Okay, fine. And then he wrote this, and I sent this email to them, and I said, good of you to make me feel like an idiot, when in fact there is a good argument for saying apoptosis.
That's right. That's right.
So, what do you say, Daniel?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because he's saying here that when there's a prefix in front of the silent P, it's no longer. So he's saying it should be apoptosis.
There's a rule. You should follow the rule.
I have to say that in the medical community, most people say apoptosis,
They
and
do.
I like
That's
the idea
right,
of these
that's right.
cells popping.
Yeah, me too.
Apoptosis. He says, let the debate continue.
But it's a living language.
great.
It's a living language, so it's almost a democracy. The more people you can get to say it one way, eventually that's true.
It is a
You
living
got it.
language. Jesse, by the way, does his own podcast. He's a graduate student.
Oh, nice.
And it's called Bacteriophiles. It's very good. It's a 3 to 4 minute podcast
Nice.
where he summarizes
Nice.
a paper every week, and you should check it out.
Cool.
Let's hear about people getting sick, Daniel.
Okay, so I have another case. And this is a fun
you do.
case. And I struggle, right? Up until I think yesterday, what case will I present next? I've got a list of all these cases I'm excited to share. So I'm turning it away so Dickson can't see the
I don't want to see the image
picture.
yet.
So here we have a young, intelligent, adventurous EIS trainee, and he reports a skin lesion on the right portion of his rear end. And EIS, do you know what EIS is, Dickson?
Well, I think it stands for Epidemiological Intelligence Service.
That's right. Epidemic
Epidemic Intelligence Service. EIS. It's a CDC-based organization.
training program.
Yeah.
They train the detectives,
Yeah,
right?
they do.
The right buttock, right?
And the right buttock is
Right in the middle, at the top or at the bottom?
So he reports that he visited Belize with a female friend during the December break. After he returned to the U.S., he noticed a red bump on his right buttock.
Red bump.
No, she did it.
He initially thought this might just be an ingrown hair or localized acne.
Go
Right?
on.
You know, he's trained. He's being trained.
He's an EIS guy.
Now, this problem continued
Right.
until on Super Bowl Sunday when something occurred that resulted in this problem being diagnosed. Some event.
This is a local thing in Long Island or in Colorado?
Well, so he's down in Georgia, right? He's training at the CDC.
Where did
And
you see him?
So I actually he told me about this. So
Okay.
Okay, should we start questioning, or
because
should we
he,
just
he
leave
actually,
it like
as
this
we'll
until
find
next
out,
time?
he ends up with the diagnosis, and then we discuss this and go through his history. And why don't you tell me what happened? And-
Well, I mean, I have my suspicions, but don't we?
Super Bowl
Don't
Sunday-
haven't we agreed to save these for next time?
well, we won't give. We're not supposed to give a differential. You're supposed to ask questions. You're
I
supposed
see.
to help.
I see. Did she have a bump on her left buttock
Right buttock.
or right buttock? Did she have any bumps of
Oh,
unexplained?
you wanted to know about her left buttock?
Or
any
nothing,
buttock
nothing
lesions?
personal, but yeah. Did she have any unidentified lesions also?
No, she had
Did
no.
we have
nothing.
any history of this guy? He went to Belize. That's it.
He went
Beaches,
to Belize.
the beaches of Belize,
Did he go to the beach?
He did go to the beaches.
There are lots of flying things in Belize.
aren't
right?
there though? But you know, we can narrow them down.
Did he wear a bathing suit, or did they go?
He actually said he wore a bathing suit much of the time.
Much of the time.
Much of the time, but you
Was
know, he
there,
would
uh,
take it off and hang it out, let it dry.
Was his room have? Did it have screens, or was it open to the?
It had screens.
And when this developed, when he came back, or before he came back?
He noticed it when he was back. He didn't notice it while in Belize. He was having a good
So
time.
he noticed it himself.
He noticed himself. He noticed I got a little bump
What does
here
he
on
look
my
at his
tail.
buttock,
So,
or he felt it? Did he feel
So-
something?
He felt something, and he
Okay.
looked. He looked. It was actually something that he could see.
Is it oozing?
No, it wasn't oozing.
It's not
does
pustule.
it-
It's not pus filled, right?
He. So should we describe the lesion? We'll ask him a little more
is it
about what it looked like.
maculopapular or?
It actually.
papular macular?
No, it actually felt,
Yes.
and it's going to seem over time to get a little bit larger in size. Initially, felt like a small, as we said, like a small bump, like it's acne. But over time, it felt like it was a little bit larger and deep,
right.
and had like a small, like sort of central.
Yeah, we think we know what this is, but I don't want to pursue this
No,
anymore.
don't give it away.
I'm not gonna
So it
give
had
it
a
away.
small central what?
Almost like you'd think almost like a zit, almost like a little hole or something that you're
Okay.
sort of surprised you couldn't squeeze.
Were the edges
zit.
red?
A little
Indurated.
bit. There was a little bit red around it.
A little
Any
bit of-
pain?
It was uncomfortable, and it got more uncomfortable, particularly as we'll find out on Super Bowl Sunday. It really felt uncomfortable.
So give us a time frame now between Belize and the Super Bowl.
Well, we know, right? When is Super Bowl Sunday?
No, it's in February.
Early February.
February.
And when did he
So
go
we're
to
talking
Belize?
we're talking about 5-6 weeks
Okay.
here.
5 or 6 weeks.
So it progresses over 5 or 6 weeks until
All right.
something happens.
Did he visit any other place besides Belize?
No. He'd just
All
been
right.
hanging out in Georgia doing his stuff.
hanging
Took his
out in
trip
Georgia.
down to Belize.
All right.
And he doesn't have any fever.
No, he actually
He otherwise
otherwise
feels
feels
fine,
fine,
right?
and
Yeah.
everything else, the rest of the story is fine. Healthy guy, no surgeries, not allergic to anything.
See, I'm going to come back to the bathing suit issue, though, because I want to know whether this is near the edge of the top of the bathing suit. Maybe it's a
No,
what
it's really
kind
right-
of bathing
no,
suit?
it's
Is it
really right
like
in the-
boxer shorts or Johnny Weissmuller
Speedos.
Speedos, the tight-fitting macho type of things that.
I used to wear those when I was
Yeah,
young.
well, we all did. We
I
all went
stopped.
through phases of that. Boy, did I stop! I can tell you that. I was forced to stop. I wouldn't stop myself. People said, "Put some clothes on."
Well, people in the U.S., in Europe, people wear men wear Speedos all
I know,
the time.
no matter what.
In the U.S., they wear the boxy
Yeah,
type shorts. I used to wear Speedos. I don't know why. I thought that had to be different.
But
No, I
these-
have a pair of Speedos I put on once just to harass my family. That I'll be wearing these to the beach today. And
Right.
they
You
all,
Probably said, "Dad, don't do that."
No, you hit the whole beach to
please,
yourself.
Dad, don't do that.
So if it were a Speedo, you could see that he could be bitten right in the exposed part. But these are probably the long-legged.
Yeah, no, these
things.
are your board type shorts.
All right.
That's puzzling.
Got some kind of bite, I
Puzzling.
suppose, by
Yeah,
some
but
kind of
you'd have to
insect.
go through the bathing suit.
It could go under it because these things don't have any tight-fitting legs. It could go into it.
Okay.
A crawly thing, lying on the beach, something could crawl. Even a spider. Or
The thing
a
that
mite
I'm
or a
thinking
tick.
about wouldn't behave that way.
Okay, well that's fine.
Are you curious about? Did he lay on the beach? Was he on a chair? Was he?
Did he lay on the sand?
with towels? And he does actually. He wore flip flops as he walked around and tried to protect himself.
Were there dogs on the beach?
Not that he saw.
Or
Was
other animals?
Were there other people?
There were other people.
Yeah.
And this was a manicured, clean beach, I suppose, right?
To some degree. He went to a few. He actually spoke very highly of Belize. So just the tourist administrator
It's
let
a great
them know
place.
it's a
great place.
great place. I keep trying to get there.
Yeah.
Eventually, I
I've
will
been
make it.
And,
within a casting distance of Belize. I was in the southernmost part of Mexico,
Yeah,
and there's a
right,
little channel to Lake Chetumal, and the other side of the channel is Belize. So
And
I've
in
actually
his life,
almost
he's
been
had
there.
no unusual medical history.
No, healthy guy.
He's a healthy guy. He's got his spleen.
Still got his spleen.
Did this resolve itself?
Well, we're going to find out what happens on Super Bowl Sunday, and maybe this is important.
Wait a minute, we have to wait till February for this final.
and maybe this, and I thought this was an important part of history. So I asked him this. His team was losing.
This is Deflate Bowl. By
This
the
is
way.
the past Super Bowl? Or
No,
an
this
old
was
one?
prior
An old
to
one.
that.
All right, his team was losing.
His team is losing, and next time we'll talk about what happens.
Did he say who his team was?
He did actually, and I wrote down.
Should we mention it?
Promptly? No, I promptly forgot.
I see. Okay.
Okay,
Because there is some raging controversy now over the last Super Bowl
I know, it's pretty upsetting.
with
So you say-
regards.
yeah, they deflated the ball, right?
They did.
So
on
what's gonna
purpose. I think they should be punished. This is a cheating thing.
Are they going to turn the victory over to
No, they
the
won't
other
do
team?
that. No, they will not do that.
Why?
But that is sort of tough, right? You
They won't do it.
cheat, or someone cheats.
well, they
and
took
you-
Penn State's victories away, right?
They did.
wow.
They did. And they tore down the statue of Joe
So
Paterno.
I think they should take away the victory give it to the other team.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be
You have to send a
interesting?
message, otherwise people are going to do the same thing over and over again. Right?
But the scuttlebutt on ESPN and all the news shows is it's not that serious.
Maybe they could replay it with properly inflated footballs, right? I mean, I would watch. I know who I would be
I didn't
rooting for.
watch
At,
I
at
didn't
this,
actually-
at this moment, I think the only deflated thing around is Tom Brady's ego.
I didn't watch the game, so I don't
Oh,
know.
it was very
Was
exciting.
it good?
It was an amazing ending.
Okay.
Amazing ending.
So we're not going to get any more
No,
information.
I think that's enough.
We
We've
have
got a
plenty
skin
of
lesion, guy
stuff
down in
going on
Belize.
here.
It feels deep. It's got this central
Right.
feature to it.
Right.
And
Is it when you palpate it? Does it cause pain?
no, not really.
And it's
No,
dry,
not really.
right? It's a dry-
It's dry. There's nothing come out of it.
All right, that's fine. Go for it, folks.
Right.
All right, this is episode 89. You can find it on iTunes, microbeworld.org/TWiP, and using any of your mobile device podcatchers. You can find it as well. If you have questions or comments, you want to guess at the case, send your emails to twip@twiv.tv. Dickson Despommier can be found at Racaniello.org and medicalecology.com. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent.
Daniel Griffin is right here at Columbia University Medical Center. Thank you, Dickson. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome, Vincent.
It is a pleasure. And I'm so behind in work. I will be here at all hours of the day.
Sorry.
For the foreseeable future.
Lots of editing here. Lots of editing.
Sign off. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music you hear on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins. You can hear his work at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP
is parasitic.